Hello, I'm Jarrett Wall, and this is my midterm exam for Intro into American Government. My topic is Stand Your Ground Law and History. To understand the Stand Your Ground Law, we have to understand the United States' relation to firearms. This topic is too broad to just talk about in this presentation, so I'll try to keep it brief. The United States cementing the Second Amendment and the Bill of Rights draws directly from the experience as a colony of Britain. Britain instituted several firearm bans in attempts to quell the revolution. In a letter to King George III, William Knox, Secretary of the Colonial Affairs, recommends the following: the militia law should be repealed, none suffered to be reenacted, and the arms of all the people should be taken away, every piece of ordnance removed into the king's storage. Among those rights also protected with the right to bear arms is the right to life and property guaranteed in the Fifth Amendment. The Fifth Amendment states that no person should be deprived of life, liberty, or property without the due process of law. It is in these rights we see the origin of the Stand Your Ground and Castle Doctrine, because if we have the right to bear arms and the right to life and property, then it is a natural extension to use our right to bear arms to protect our lives and property. Stand Your Ground as a law is relatively new. The first state to adopt the law was Florida in 2005. Stand Your Ground states differ from normal states with self-defense laws. Normally, a citizen has the duty to retreat when confronted with what they believe is deadly force. Stand Your Ground removes most of that requirement to retreat, meaning that people no longer have to try to escape before using deadly force. Many states differ on their version of the law, but the most common is as follows. A Stand Your Ground law provides that people may use deadly force when they reasonably believe it necessary to defend against a threat of death, serious bodily harm, kidnapping, and rape, although some states also expand it to in the case of robbery or other serious crimes. You can only use Stand Your Ground in cases in which you are not committing a crime. The Castle Doctrine is often included with the Stand Your Ground law, but these are distinct and different laws. The Castle Doctrine is more widely accepted, being used in 37 states, although different states have varying laws on it. For comparison, Stand Your Ground is only legal in 35, and only 27 have statutes providing there is no duty to retreat. The main difference between the two is that the Castle Doctrine designates your home or abode as a safe space you can use force to protect. You do not need to be in fear for your life like the Stand Your Ground law. The Castle Doctrine is more often used to protect property and not human life, although that is not always the case. To be covered under the Castle Doctrine, you have to be in a place that you are legally allowed to be, and the intruder has to be illegally trespassing. Unlike the Castle Doctrine, to be covered under the Stand Your Ground law, you have to be in fear for your life. A shooting is not justified if it is over property in most cases. The biggest variation among Stand Your Ground states is in the duty to retreat. 24 states have no clause saying there is a duty to retreat an attacker. These states include our home state of Michigan. 10 states have a Stand Your Ground, but also vary in their details and do not all cover the same circumstances, with the most common variation in these states being the duty to attempt to retreat from the attacker. In all duty to retreat states, that rule does not apply if it is in their own home, unless it is another occupant of that home. In Connecticut, Delaware, Hawaii, Nebraska, and North Dakota, the duty to retreat does not apply in the defender's place of work. This rule was passed in part to help combat the epidemic of mass shootings. For this part of the video, I will just focus on the Stand Your Ground law in our home state of Michigan. Michigan is one of 27 states that have a full no duty to retreat Stand Your Ground. We also have the Castle Doctrine. Michigan, which passed it in 2006, was one of the first states to pass the Stand Your Ground law. It passed with significant bipartisan support. The bill was then signed by Governor Jennifer Granholm, a Democrat. Maybe a sign of our shifting politics, many Michigan Democratic senators and representatives have come out against the bill, one being Representative Tim Bradshaw, a Democrat from Grosse Pointe, who said the following: "This Stand Your Ground law is one of the only laws that I can think of that promotes violence." The effect this law has on the crime rate in Michigan is hard to say. The law was enacted in 2006 after a recent surge in violent crime that started in 2005. After this law was enacted, violent crime dropped, and we have a lower and lower decreases until the year 2015. Although it is hard to credit Stand Your Ground as the reason for this crime drop, at the very least it does not seem to increase Michigan's violent crime. But it is not enough evidence to claim it was a successful deterrent. Many credit this drop to better economic changes with the country pulling out of the recession. The effect on the crime rate as a whole seems to be very different than the effect on just our state alone. Texas A&M University economist Mark Hoekstra, who studied the effect of the laws, found that states with Stand Your Ground law have more homicides than states without such laws. These laws lower the cost of lethal force, says Mark Hoekstra. As a result, you get more of it. His study finds that homicides go up 7 to 9% in states that pass the law. One small critique of mine is that of course Stand Your Ground increases the homicide rate, because giving the victim the ability to kill the victimizers does increase the amount of people killed. The effect on the crime rate, though, would be more telling of how effective it is. Now would be a good time to go over two of our most controversial cases: the Michael Druka case and the Trayvon Martin case. A Florida man, Michael Druka, shot an unarmed black man who shoved him in a parking lot dispute. The victim walked out of a convenience store and saw Mr. Druka arguing with his wife. See, Mr. Druka was mad that they were parked in a handicap place. The victim, seeing his wife being accosted, proceeds to shove Mr. Druka onto his back, and then takes a step back. Mr. Druka then opens fire on the unarmed and retreating man, killing him. A month later, Michael Druka is charged with murder, partly because Florida's Stand Your Ground says it does not apply to a person who initially provokes the use of force against him. Also, the victim was retreating away from him. Ultimately, Michael Druka was found guilty and sentenced to 20 years in prison and a $5,000 fine. The next case, the Trayvon Martin case, would divide the nation and lead to a continuing discussion on Stand Your Ground. On his way home from a convenience store, Trayvon Martin was seen by George Zimmerman, a member of the Community Watch. Zimmerman called the police on a non-emergency line. While on the phone, Zimmerman mentioned past robberies in the neighborhood. Zimmerman said Trayvon was very suspicious looking and up to no good. The police told Mr. Zimmerman not to follow Trayvon. He did so anyway. He would later say he did this to ascertain the location for the police. A fight would break out. Zimmerman fired upon Trayvon, who was unarmed, killing him. When the police came, Zimmerman claimed it was in self-defense, and because of Florida's notoriously lax Stand Your Ground laws, they could not arrest him at the time. A special prosecutor appointed by Florida's governor charged Zimmerman with second-degree murder. Second-degree murder is murder that is intentional but not planned out. He pleaded not guilty. Zimmerman's claim was he was only shot Trayvon after being attacked. He claimed that Trayvon had repeatedly bashed his head onto the concrete, and wounds on Mr. Zimmerman seemed to back this up, as Mr. Zimmerman had front and back head wounds as if his head was beaten against the concrete, as shown on the two photos on the right. Of course, this doesn't prove that Mr. Zimmerman did not start the fight. Later in 2012, an all-female jury ruled that Mr. Zimmerman was innocent. This ruling sparked protests around the country and calls to examine Stand Your Ground as a law. Following the Trayvon Martin case, our two-party system seemed to fracture, with mostly Republicans supporting Stand Your Ground and mostly Democrats opposing it. Gone are the days of the universal bipartisan support for Stand Your Ground. Following the Trayvon Martin case, there was compelling discussion on both sides about Stand Your Ground. One of the pros often said is that it allows anyone to protect themselves regardless of age, race, and creed. The Chicago Tribune noted in October 2013, poor African Americans who live in high-crime neighborhoods stand the most to gain, because it makes it easier to protect oneself when the law enforcement can't make it speedily enough. Another pro being one that was stated in the beginning, that Stand Your Ground seems to be the natural extension from the Second and Fifth Amendment rights. The second being the right to bear arms, and the fifth containing the right to life. But on the other side of the coin, many see the right to stand your ground unconstitutional because it is putting the right to bear arms and the right of property ahead of one's right to life. Another con is also that stand your ground leads to a higher homicide rate in certain states. For example, Florida saw a 24% increase in homicide rates after the passage of Stand Your Ground law, says Humphreys from Internal JUCO Med. Now we are going to look at the presidential candidates' support and opposition to Stand Your Ground. Joe Biden has been very silent on his stance on stand your ground, but his home state of Delaware has moderate castle doctrine, where outside your home and business it is illegal to use deadly force. But his vice president, Kamala Harris, is no moderate and has made her views very clear. She said she would ban states from enacting stand your ground laws. Donald Trump, meanwhile, has not directly made his views shown, but he is supported by the NRA, the National Rifle Association, the biggest gun lobbying group in the U.S. The NRA strongly supports stand your ground. In conclusion, the history of the United States has left us with a strong gun culture. After all, our founding fathers used those guns and militias guaranteed in the Second Amendment to overthrow colonial rule from England. And the same document, the Bill of Rights, that guarantees us the right to bear arms under the Second Amendment, guarantees people the right to life and property. So stand your ground is a natural evolution of these rights. It makes sense to use your Second Amendment to protect your Fifth Amendment. Although seemingly being a natural extension, this law is relatively new, being first passed in Florida in 2005. As written, the law gives someone the ability to protect themselves if he believes his life is in danger. Many states have different interpretations, many states saying you have to make an attempt to flee. Our home state doesn't seem to have garnered an increase in violent crime rate from the passing of this law, which is odd comparing Michigan to Florida, which saw a 24% jump after the law was enacted. Our state seems to be the best example of stand your ground working, and Florida being the state wherein it appears to be not working, as their homicide rate and gun deaths spiked after the law was first enacted. Since this law's first passing, there has been many high-profile cases. For example, the Michael Dreyka case and the Trayvon Martin case. Although it seems like the law got it right in both cases, these cases brought this law to the forefront in our country's mind. Soon after this, the two political parties would have their own stances on the law, with Democrats opposing the law and Republicans supporting it in most cases. This is even more noticeable in our two candidates for president. Donald Trump, who has been endorsed by the NRA, a strong lobbying group that supports stand your ground, and Joe Biden's pick of Kamala Harris as VP, who has a hardline stance of removing stand your ground. This is an issue that continues to divide our country, and I hope I have helped educate you on the topic and helped you form your own opinions. There is an election coming, and I hope you can let your opinion on this topic be heard. This has been my presentation on the stand your ground law. Here are my sources, and on the other page are my JSTOR sources.